watch for folks coming into the waiting room.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Well, hi, everyone. And I echo Andrew's, thoughts about all of our colleagues that are in hurricane affected areas. And I think it's a big part of why we do this work is when things like that happen, we have to rely on the relationships that we've been building over time to take care of each other. So just thinking of everyone. So this is our monthly farm to food assistance community of practice. And this is our last farm to food assistance community of practice. We've been meeting together in this space for 2 years. Myself and Miles Gordon with Kitchen Table Consulting have been facilitating this for the last year. And Andy and I can't remember her name. Anyway, Andy and Ava, thank you. We're facilitating for the year prior, and we're really here to celebrate today and talk about a lot of the gains in this profession over the last 2 years and share with you many, many things and good news. So before we get started, though, I'd like to read our community agreements. This is how we show up in our space together as a community. Some of you are here for the very first time, and we're grateful to have you. And many of you have been with us for a long time, and we just encourage you to take one of these on for yourself for the next hour and a half. So we honor and celebrate our collective wisdom because together we know a lot. We are mindful of our power, privilege, and how much space we take up. We take responsibility for our impact regardless of our intent. We give grace to one another and approach conflict with curiosity. We challenge assumptions, respect our differences, and speak from our own experience. We honor confidentiality, lessons leave, stories stay. We take care of our own physical, mental, and emotional needs, and we meet each other where we are. Showing up is enough, and listening is participating. So just take a deep breath maybe and try one of those on for the rest of this conversation. We're grateful to have you. And just take a minute to be here. Just a little housekeeping before we get started with the main meat of our conversation today. We really encourage you to keep your cameras on so we can see you and participate as community, but we know a lot of you are driving or you're trying to participate during other things that you're doing for your work. So we understand that. We just want to encourage you to be present and to the best of your ability. We really encourage use of the chat. We're going to really encourage it a lot today. So stay engaged. Feel free to offer thoughts and ideas and connect with one another through the chat function. This call is being recorded, as you may have heard, and it's going to be made available and emailed to everyone who registered. And also, as always, there is a discussion board. And even though this is our last time meeting in this formal space, the discussion board will remain. And it's such a great way to connect about the issues that we all are working amongst in our work together. And I really encourage everyone to stay connected through the discussion board as time goes on. So Miles, would you like to tell everyone about our objectives and what we're up to today?
Great. So as Jen said, today's a celebration of the Farm to Food Assistance Community of Practice. For the past 2 years, we've collaboratively supported the growth of this field, the practice of bringing justice to our emergency food networks, sharing knowledge, resources, and advocacy tools. And as a result of this work together, the Food Systems Leadership Network has created the first ever substantive report on the values, models, successes, challenges, and recommendations for frothering the work of our community. We don't have, it's not out in the field. This is an emerging field. And so we have been sort of the frontline practitioners of putting that into place. And the report is titled Farm to Food Assistance, a Model for Values-Based, Equity-Centered Approaches to Transforming the Food System. So we'll have Susan Schempf and Andrew Carberry will present an overview of that report and what we've done and learned together, as well as the recommendations for advancing the farm to food assistance work. So to meet those objectives, we're going to drop into our agenda, which is we're going to actually start with, and if we can go to the next slide there, an update from Hannah Quigley with the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition on the latest successes. Lots to celebrate there we'll hear about, very excited. from LFPA advocacy efforts and how to continue to advocate for that and the Farm Bill. We're going to have a brief survey after that of an evaluation survey on this community of practice, what it's done, how it's met your needs, hopefully, so we can think about how to continue getting funding and continuing this work. And then we'll get an overview from Susan and Andrew on that report. And we're going to really finish up by asking you all to contribute your ideas on what is needed now as this formal space of this round of the community of practice comes to its culmination. Where do we go from here? And who's best situated to take us there? Obviously, FSLN can play a role, but we have a lot of other great resources out here, so we're going to want to hear from you. So I'd like to start by introducing Hannah Quigley, if you don't know her, from NSAC, to share some great news and to talk about where we can go from here as a group and use our efforts collectively.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks to the Wallace Center for always being a great partner in the space, and to many of you for doing lots of wonderful advocacy work, maybe for the first time this year or last year. I tried to make sure to share far and wide the great news, of the additional funding for LFPA that was announced. That comes along with additional funding being announced for local food and schools initiatives, as well as additional funding for TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, specifically to purchase local product, and a new initiative that we have not, we've not seen before, which is $200 million for early childcare and education centers to do local sourcing. So very exciting, great news. It had become more and more obviously of a concern for many of you on these calls and your farmers and your networks of how do we plan, for next growing season with such uncertainty, without a farm bill, without knowing what the future was going to be for LFPA. So what this announcement does bring, is hopefully some ability for organizations, for you all to plan with your farmer networks and do some production planning and bring a bit more consistency to that space. I will say that the news is still very fresh. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. I met with USDA last week to try to learn a bit more detail of this, next steps and timing and things like that. And they're still very much working out those details. So some big takeaways I wanted to be sure to share with you all in the group is a couple of things. We don't expect there to be any sort of panicked rush to submit plans before the end of 2024. So that's good news for states, departments of ag, and whoever it might have been, Health and Human Services or social services, whoever in your state was running, as the state administrator for that program. We don't expect any sort of panic, kind of tight deadlines around any holiday seasons as the end of the year. That also means now is a great time to reach out to your states. So if you, have been a partner in your LFPA or your local food and schools programs, you want to continue to be a partner in the implementation of that program, it's a really great time to get in front of your state administrator, continue to share the good work of what you've been doing. If you have any ideas of improvements for the program, now's a great time to share, because basically this is when you can really influence the potential plan that they will have to submit to USDA. So just like with the other cooperative agreements that have happened in the previous iterations of this round of funding, states will have to submit a plan. It'll have to be approved. They'll have to go through all of those steps. So that does mean there's some potential for you all to influence the program operating in your state in some shape or form. Another big thing I will flag, we expect maybe a couple of changes to make things easier. So, maybe some simplified reporting for agencies and the subawardees, the information that you're having to collect from farmers. So we're hopeful for that, and some simplified reporting and also templates. And we've still been pushing, more and more the ongoing need for more advanced cash payments to support any kind of issues with cash flow and things like that as well. So I'm still here and listening. So if you have any other kind of concerns or things you want to bring to the attention of USDA, if you don't have that great relationship at your state level and you want to flag those for me to carry at the national level, please do feel free. I'll be sure to put my email in the chat. And the one question I have for you all, actually, so this round of LFPA will mirror some sort of restrictions and flexibilities in how you can use funds as the LFPA plus round. So all that to say, it is the same pot of funding that was used to fund LFPA plus. So that's the Commodity Credit Corporation versus the American Rescue Plan Act funding, which was the first round of LFPA, which provided a lot of flexibility for how to use those funds. And my question to you all on the ground is that going to be an issue? You know, are there any concerns for it being funding that is similar to LFPA plus? And if so, I'd love to hear why. My email inbox is open for you all to share some of those things with me, because I'm trying to make the case to USDA and problem solve on implementing and making some interpretation of how to use the CCC funds. So I already see some things coming in the chat, and I see some hands, and I don't know, Miles, how we're doing on time if we
We're
have
fine.
an ability.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Take any questions or respond to anything in the chat right now.
Cool, wonderful. Yes, so administrative expenses. So I would love to, talk about that a bit more. My understanding, and from conversations and previous conversations with lots of folks who know great things, is if you are I'm trying not to disclose any sources of information. But if you are packaging the cost of your food to be inclusive of transportation, storage, so the transportation of aggregating, distributing it, those sort of things, as well as what you make the cost of that food to store it in your cold storage or in your warehouse or however you're storing it, those types of costs are considered approved costs with CCC funds or LFPA plus funds. So there is a lot in the way you package the cost of your food in order to consider, the human costs around and all these other kind of costs that are associated with purchasing food and delivering food into your communities. So that will, I know at least that much. I have not been able to get clear answers quite yet on, what about the time of calling farmers, doing outreach to farmers, production planning with farmers, reporting on the program. So, I'm aware that there are a lot of steps and things that go into implementing these programs, and we're trying to still work on answering that. Sarah, do you want to go for a question while I kind of glance at the chat?
Sarah, you're muted. You have your hand raised. Benny, you want to ask?
I think I also saw in the chat earlier that.
Here she comes.
Sure.
Hi,
Oh, hey.
hi. I'm sorry. This is Julia from Vermont. I'm filling in for Sarah, so that's why I didn't respond to her name. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you so much for the info. That's really helpful. And just to kind of triple clarify, so there won't be any staff related eligible expenses either for the state folks that are like implementing the umbrella award or for the sub awards.
That is,
Like,
yes, that is my understanding. So, and I will say that when I expressed this concern to some folks at USDA, they were shocked, honestly. And they said, oh, we've not heard of any issues. So I think it's important for you all to share that there might be issues.
Hannah, what's the best way? I would even go so far as to say, like, it's almost impossible to utilize these funds if there's no staff, either on the state admin side, because then we need to find money to pay our staff to administer. And folks have literally said, like, we didn't even apply to the CCC round because it's just impossible. And so it's a earth-shattering burden to not have any room for staff costs. So what's the best way that we can like get you some info or examples or quotes, if there's any leeway to potentially, I don't know.
And there's and let's oh, sorry, I think Julie, you were cutting out. I do want to be clear, there are in some ways complete regulation that we cannot, like, there's not a flexibility within certain regulations and
Right.
how regulations are interpreted and implemented. However, there are other options that we at INSAC would pursue, like trying to pursue some discretionary funding through an appropriations package to try to supplement, and funnel funding to the implementation of this program. That it might be a case that you'd have to make at your state level if we weren't able to secure federal funding for implementing. So this is definitely where I'm trying to get information from you all to know how big of an issue it is going to be. I saw some things coming in the chat, which is really helpful, because it helps me pursue, where it is that we need to push and where it is that we need to determine, the feasibility of the program without those funds. So to that point, you're welcome to send me, you could just start with an email. It doesn't have to be super formal in any shape or form. Maybe to note, the staff that's required at the state level, which I know, Julie, that's where y'all are calling from, and but also implementers, subawardees. There's a great opportunity in your next for state implementers in your upcoming any kind of office hour conversations with USDA to make sure to flag this concern and bring it up to them. And so for the people on the call who are down on the ground and doing that work, and you're a subaward, and you need to go ahead and flag that to your state and take that to your state implementer so that they can take it to USDA as well. So you have to work through our existing communication channels, but do know that those office hours, they're ongoing, they're being held. So there is an open communication channel with states and USDA. And so to lean into those as best we can and to funnel that information up is a great way to flag it. And you can also send it to me.
Great. And I see that I know some folks that are doing the program in California and Utah are also saying agreed. So would you invite them also to send that information to you by email?
Sure. I'm going to also take notes from the chat and everybody's name too before I hop off this call.
Great. We probably have time for about 1 or 2 more responses on this, and then you can maybe folks afterwards, if you still have more things for Hannah, you can either email her or put it in the chat and she could respond in the chat directly. But is there another response you want to provide from things that are in the chat? I don't see any other hands up right now.
I also just want to add, Hannah, I'm sure you'll be using the discussion board to provide updates and make requests. So if you get a message board update that comes in through your email and it has Hannah's name on it, now's the time to pay close attention to it.
Yep, I was going to post the same question out to the discussion board, Jen. So, yeah.
Great. So if you want to drop your email into the chat if you haven't yet, and again, if folks have things they want to directly go through email and follow up with Hannah and the great work they're doing at NSAC around this, they are your key people and Hannah is leading them. So thank you, Hannah, for all the work you've done. And again, if there's some things in the chat you want to just hit right now, she's going to be paying attention to that for another few minutes and can respond in the chat. I'll turn it over to Andrew and to introduce the brief survey we're going to ask you to do before we get into the meat of what we've learned from the COP and some of the recommendations.
All right, thanks, Miles. Yeah, we do want to hear from folks since this is 2 years into this community. There's the link, and get your input. There's also like some just reporting metrics we have to do for our USDA grants, so you'll probably recognize the first couple of questions around that, and then the rest are more fun about giving your input and shaping the future, what this has meant. So I'm gonna put a song on, and I'll watch the responses. We have held 5 minutes, but if a bunch come in, we can end sooner than that.
Great. So if everybody can see that link in the chat, it says Survey Monkey. You can hit that. We're gonna have 5 minutes for you to think about the evaluation and respond.
Is this the same one that was sent in the email?
I think we'll pause there. Thanks for your input. Keep it going. We had a lot come in, so appreciate those that have gotten it done. You can welcome to keep working on that as we go, but we do take your input seriously and we'll use that to shape what we offer next.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. There's a couple things coming in the chat too. Folks want to, maybe some of that is also for Hannah to respond to. But Susan, I want to turn it over to you to talk about the exciting things happening with the report and what we've learned and what some of those recommendations are.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And thanks again for helping us out with our survey. As Andrew was saying, if you have a local food promotion program grant, you're familiar with these metrics. We're trying to collect data now so we can channel that into our final report. So, as we said at the top of the call, this call today is really like the culmination of several years of farm to food assistance, research, peer-to-peer learning, advocacy, data collection, all the stuff that has been funded in part by that USDA Local Food Promotion Program grant and also with additional support from the Rockefeller Foundation. And I was just reflecting on this. We actually, as the Wallace Center and the Food Systems Leadership Network, really started getting involved and learning about and exploring the space of farm to food assistance back in about 2018 when we had launched a program called the Game Changers Lab. And Miles was a part of that project, amongst maybe some other people that are in the room, where we had brought together some teams across the country and we said, what would it look like to develop community-based strategies that address food insecurity and farmer economic viability at the same time? And it was sort of an exploratory space at that time. This is pre-pandemic. And it was mostly organizations that were trying just like kind of creative strategies. And then the pandemic hit. And suddenly there was a proliferation of this work of folks being like finding these places of intersection where there were skyrocketing food insecurity rates. We're at the highest food insecurity in the nation of all time right now, 47 million Americans. And that has sustained since the pandemic and grown. And at the same time, in this crisis around American agriculture and farm viability, especially amongst small to mid-scale producers, and particularly true for Black, Indigenous, and other farmers of color. And so, we've been kind of pulling folks together to just try to crack this nut together for many years. And these resources through the LFPP and Rockefeller have really enabled a much deeper dive into it since really 2021. So these are some of all the many farm to food assistance things that have happened over the last couple of years through this community. First, we launched this community of practice back in October 2022. So it's 2 years now. We've had 20 virtual calls. We have covered so many different areas of farm to food assistance and have learned so much together and generated a lot of resources and knowledge and learning. We did a survey in partnership with Duke World Food Policy Center. This was back in 2022. We shared those key findings out. I think from our understanding, it was the first national survey of this work, just to try to get a sense of like, what's happening out there? Who's doing this work? How many farmers are they working with? What kind of price points are they paying? Is it happening in rural communities? Is it happening in tribal communities? Just trying to get like a scan of what was happening. Kind of in parallel to this sort of broader umbrella of farm to food assistance, we really started to do a deep dive into the local food purchase assistance program. When that was launched, we were like, okay, this is a great opportunity. Let's really learn about it. Let's test some assumptions here. Let's try to prove this concept together and share those learnings back with both USDA policymakers and the field itself. So we produced an initial impact report that was really helpful for advocacy when the program had just been announced and just kind of generating like some buzz around this program too. We then launched the Farm to Food Assistance Learning Lab, which if you've been in this community of practice, you've heard a lot about. It was 10 teams that we were able to provide with $20,000 grants each to be a part of this research together. And this report that we're going to be giving you a sneak peek of today is really a reflection of the learning from that learning lab. We've done 8 state spotlights on local food purchase assistance program as it's been rolling out in different states. Those are we just got those out the door, I think last week. So those are really beautiful, tell great stories. I want to give a particular shout out to the folks here from California and Rhode Island and Ohio and Oregon and New Mexico and Iowa, Oregon and Ohio. Did I say those? Virginia and Michigan. Those are the 8. there is such good work happening in LFPA, and those spotlights really shine a light on them. And then coming soon, as we kind of wrap up this, tremendous amount of work that's gone into all this, is the report that we'll give you the peek of, and then one final report on LFPA learnings from implementers. So that is under production right now. Let's go to the next slide. I want to just give some real love to all the people who have contributed, and it's you. It's all of you here in this room, whether you're named here or not. There have been at least 50 people who've like directly given input into the report that we'll be publishing. And Miles and Jen and Ava and Andy as facilitators of this community of practice were huge leaders in that. Allison Cohen and Rachel Danifer, who are the co-authors of this report, have been involved. Allison was one of our Learning Lab advisors, been involved in this process all along. Hannah and everyone from NSAC, all the Learning Lab teams. We've had like so many different streams of inputs here. So just huge shout out to all of the people that have contributed to this. And I really hope that you will see yourselves reflected and your experiences reflected in this final report. Next slide. So here's a little sneak peek. Look how beautiful that cover is. It's funny, I like dork out on this now because so much work's gone into creating a report, but I really am very pleased with how pretty it is. So the title is Farm to Food Assistance, a model for values-based, equity-centered approaches to transforming the food system. There's some sections in here. The beginning is just a great intro about like what is farm to food assistance and what is the transformative potential of this particular strategy. We then go into the core values of values-based, equity-centered approaches to farm to food assistance. And y'all might remember a couple of calls ago, Rachel and Allison were here to like show the first draft of those values, and we kind of tested them with the group and got some more input on them and then refined them based on that conversation. So those values are laid out. And then we go into a section that then describes how those values are put into action in these programs across the country. So that's a really great, the model strategy is a really great section. Within that also includes challenges and roadblocks, and just, they're going to be very familiar to you in terms of, struggles around sustained funding, lack of infrastructure, challenges around consistent supply of food. Some of those things will be real clear. And then we look at some recommendations, like based on everything that we've learned and where we're headed with this, what's needed next, and some recommendations there. We also included some resources because we always want this to be resourceful. And last but definitely not least, 10 Learning Lab profiles are also included in this. So there's 10 independent pieces that feature the work of each of the teams that participated in that Farm to Food Assistance Learning Lab. And they are really beautiful and beautiful stories. So really excited for y'all to be able to see all of those. All right, next slide. So the overall thesis here, and we want to be really clear, it's values-based, equity-centered farm to food assistance. It is not a silver bullet, and it is not a panacea for everything that we are trying to do to transform the food system, but it does move us along the continuum from charity to justice. And that is where these following outcomes are mutually inclusive. So we are moving towards a food system where farmers are paid a fair market value for their products. Community members experiencing food insecurity have access to farm fresh food, not just food, but farm fresh food. Healthy food access and agroecological farming and fishing communities are interdependent. They're not siloed out. They're not separate systems. Local and regional food and farm economies are revitalized, and the economic benefits are multiplied as dollars recirculate through the local economy. Farmers and food insecure neighbors come to know each other as members of the same community. Racial oppression that displaces Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities from their land and waterways and from each other is dismantled. people have agency to determine their own community food system. That's in food sovereignty, and food systems are designed to heal the earth and nourish people. This is what we're aiming towards, and we believe that farm to food assistance is one of the pathways that can help us get there. Next slide. Just a quick reminder of those values that underpin the kind of farm to food assistance that we here in this community are wanting to advance. We know that to do this work well and to do it right, it's underpinned by relationships, by generative relationships that are across from farm to fork. Everyone that is involved needs to be connected with one another, and that's a really essential value to farm to food assistance. Centering equity in all of its dimensions, racial equity, gender equity, language justice. We go into what that exactly means in the report. Dignity, both for people who are receiving the food and are the clients of food access organizations, as well as the farmers, the food chain workers, all of the people that are involved in this value chain. Valuing a seat at the table and the importance of community expertise and lived experience in the leadership of these programs and decision-making of these programs. And caring for the earth through sustainable and regenerative agriculture. I really love this quote from Zofia, who's one of the Learning Lab team members. I'm just going to read it out loud. What we are learning is that food is the connection. Farm to food assistance can only exist with this unification quality when we use it to bring people together and not to divide. Also, when food sovereignty is really the main goal. Food assistance on its own is a dead-end road. We cannot food assist our way out of hunger. It's important that farmers participate and that they are valued and they get a good return, but at the same time, farm to food assistance can only be a stepping stone to a real solution. Couldn't have said it any better, and the report is really full of beautiful quotes like this from the focus groups, from the Learning Lab teams and others. So it's really like in your words. Next slide. We are now going to shift into going through the recommendations that are in the report. So I'm kind of skipping all the innards of the report and going straight to the end of the recommendations. And as we do this, I would really just encourage y'all to write down your ideas of how you and your organization and your networks might be able to help realize these recommendations or move them forward. We don't just put them out there to like look pretty and sound really good, right? It's really like, well, this is the action. This is what we need to do. So let's approach it in this community of practice in that spirit of like, how can we move these forward? What are the things that we can do next and that we're already doing that we can share with one another to advance these recommendations? So encourage you to put your ideas in the chat, jot them down, and we'll have some time after we go through these. Andrew and I are going to kind of go back and forth between the 6 recommendations and just, want to have some conversation at the end. Maybe I'll pause there and see, Miles, Jen, Andrew, anything important about the overall thing that I've missed?
One thing, I don't know if you touched on the audience, but like who can use this report and how folks can share it once we share it with them.
Yeah, you want to answer that?
Oh, sure. So we asked that when we started and writing with Allison and Rachel, who's the audience for this report. And there's a lot of different audiences, a lot, yourselves, practitioners, to learn from each other and to see recommendations. But a lot of this is things that you're already doing. So other audiences are, policymakers that you can take to them and then cite this, share it, and also funders to help them understand the challenges and where the gaps are in funding for farm to food assistance and what it would mean, where you could get if you had additional funding. I think those were the 3 main. Yeah.
And I just want to add, I can remember, I just put it in the chat too. I remember when we were trying to start a food hub here in Northern California, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And it was a report like this that the Wallace Center had done with Michigan, and those reports that's like, oh, these are examples of how this can work. And it was so key when it's a new and unfolding kind of movement to change the food system to be able to have these kind of resources to just put it all in one piece to get you started. So I'm really excited to see this.
Thanks, Miles. Yeah, and Allison, please, love for you to chime in at any point if you want about some of these recommendations. Allison's really poured her heart and mind into crafting this. So, Allison, just want to invite your voice in too. So let's get going on the recommendations. First and foremost is we need narrative change. We need to shift from a mindset and an overarching paradigm of food charity to food rights. One of my, people that I've learned a lot from, I didn't actually ever know her, but I've read her books, Danella Meadows. Y'all might be familiar with Danella Meadows, a leader in systems thinking. Her work on leverage points in a system really pointed to that the strongest or highest point of leverage in a system is in the underlying mental models or the narratives that shape that system. They're like deeply held beliefs that basically drive and perpetuate a system. And when we can change those underlying beliefs, those underlying paradigms, we can change the world. And we have so many examples of that in our lives, of how narratives have shifted and then systems have shifted as a result of it. And so in this farm to food assistance space, this is really essential. The dominant narrative has been that hunger will always be with us and that charity will always be necessary. We just kind of take that at face value. Many of us have just kind of received that truth. It's kind of like we believe these truths to be self-evident. Those are the kinds of things that are mental models or dominant narratives. We've also been told that, we need to grow more food to be able to feed the world. That's a very pervasive narrative. And other narratives like poor people should pull themselves up from their bootstraps, or they should take whatever food they can get. These are the kinds of things that then perpetuate a system of inequity and perpetuate hunger in our communities. What would it look like and what would look different if that narrative shifted to everyone has a right to healthy food? Everyone has a right to food. And if our tax dollars were used to invest in a food system that actually nourishes our communities and our planet. And I think, Ton, I see your face here. You had a beautiful quote from our conversations here that when we're trying to shift to rights and not charity, there's a lot of work that has to be done there. We have to get to the root causes of hunger to end it. And it's shifting this idea. Our goal is not just to feed as many people as possible. So I thought your quote was really beautifully stated here. Next slide. Some of the ways that we can do this is creating messaging about the social, environmental benefits of supporting local farmers, especially Black, Indigenous, and other farmers of color and socially disenfranchised farmers. We need to lift up these stories and how important it is for folks to be able to remain viable on small family-owned farms. I know we're kind of preaching to the choir here, but the message still isn't out there, y'all. We still have to keep pushing this. We need to build more community awareness about this. I was just sharing with Andy Fisher, a longtime partner of ours, and Andy's been involved in challenging the charitable food system for some time. And I was saying, back in 2005, I approached a food bank in Mendocino County where I was working about buying from local farmers. And they literally looked at me like I was nuts. Like, that's never gonna happen. And here we are 20 years later where that is absolutely happening. So we need to continue to build awareness about the kinds of programs that you're doing, that there are people across the country that are making these connections, and that it is possible to use our tax dollars to catalyze the growth of local food production, small to mid-scale family farmers, et cetera. We need to continue to raise awareness about the political power that's wielded by big food and agricultural corporations and challenge the status quo. We're going to get into this a little bit in equity and public funding. And then also continuing to raise awareness amongst funders that measuring progress in terms of an increase in the number of people fed and the pounds of food distributed is counterintuitive when we're trying to end hunger, when that's our mission. We want to see those numbers going down.
Susan, can I make a quick comment?
Please jump in.
Yeah, so another thing I was thinking about in terms of narrative change is, who's the target audience for this narrative change? And we talk about funders, we talk about food banks, but I also want to encourage us to think about messaging for the volunteers at food banks. And that I think farm to food assistance, particularly those that are implementing it, believe in it and see the impact of how it supports and helps to kind of buoy a local community food system, that those volunteers there are millions of them across the country. And imagine being able to harness that power to really wield some narrative change. So just another thought.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. All right, Andrew, over to you for recommendation 2.
All right, so yeah, we're gonna go back and forth through the 6 recommendations. So just hang in there with us. This one is like everybody together, like we've all that we need long-term sustainable funding for farm to food assistance. Heard it from everybody. And what that enables is, we all know, stable farmers and reliable access for communities that are in need of food assistance. And as we're seeing now with the announcement from USDA, and hopefully that can be more stable and predictable in the future. It also increases the potential for farm to food assistance to be transformational, because the more runway people have, the more they can plan and take risks in what they're doing, versus having a short term where they're just banking on that, but then they don't know what's next. They're not able to take a risk. So I think, as we'll see later, it enables people to invest and take risks, the more predictable and long-term the funding is. Around that, there were recommendations about how funding should be allocated. And I think this is the more probably juicy part for you all. But funding access at farmers markets and language justice strategies, including translation of materials for farmers and for recipients, and interpretation as well for live interpretation if there's trainings going on or things, just making sure language is not a barrier to participation. Technical assistance to farmers, including that in terms of wholesale readiness, because it can help farmers to reach new markets if they have some training, access to loans and grants, and also support for growing culturally important crops. We've seen so much of that, heard so many great stories about it, how people made that work through these programs. Investing in local infrastructure, including hard costs along the value chain, as well as the soft costs, but including like truck leases and cold storage, just to make it easier to keep the food fresh while it's getting to the people it needs to. So the soft cost value chain coordinators to help farmers and to provide education, like we were saying about narrative change. These people can do that in community with both in terms of root causes of hunger and the challenges of farmers, to help people to realize that and address those. And investing in organizational capacity. You all have brought up the administrative dollars already today. That was also brought up clearly throughout. So as we're going through these, invite you to share in the chat or just write down things that you're doing around this, or ideas you have around these recommendations. And I'll hand it back to Susan.
All right, equity in public funding. So I was looking back at some figures. The US government is one of the largest grocery shoppers in the country. $33 billion spent on food between 2018 and 2022. $33 billion. That's for military bases, school cafeterias, food banks, and other channels. But in 2022, USDA's top 25 vendors, okay, which represent 8% of the total number of vendors, collectively received half of the total spending. So there is absolutely inequity and some purpose in where those dollars are going channeled, or where they're being channeled now. And we really want to see that shift. And that was really coming through in the recommendations from everyone, and is indicated in these quotes too, of like, there's something very inequitable in the way in which our tax dollars are being channeled to support a food system that is producing negative outcomes in our communities and in our environment. What does it really mean to shift that? We really need to reconfigure how our tax dollars are being allocated and how those fund distributions are perpetuating the issues that we are all working so hard to solve. I think it's really important to name that that LFPA has demonstrated and proven the concept that public dollars can be channeled differently for USDA procurement. And we can get those dollars down to the ground level and get really good, fresh, healthy food to the people who need it most. I think that, you know, while the funding seems significant of LFPA, it's certainly more funding that's gone towards local and regional food systems, and at least in my career, since I've been working in this space since really 20 plus years, it's still just a drop in the bucket compared to the dollars that are spent on purchasing elsewhere in the US government. So we just need to continue pushing for that to shift. And you know, we're not even necessarily getting into all of the subsidies that are you know, via crop insurance and others. That is really the vast majority of money that's going to massive farms that aren't even growing food for us to eat. So we dig into this in the report, and there's some great material that y'all will be able to pull from in terms of being able to quote, you know, real statistics and such around the crop subsidy allocations and such, and be able to really like kind of help to make this case with your own policymakers and such. Allison, is there anything that you want to add around equity and public funding here? Okay, let's go to Andrew.
Sorry, I was just replying to something in the chat about the announcement. Yeah, so number 4 about is fair prices for small farmers and producers. And a lot of people use the term fair, but when we asked and dug into that, it was hard to find a good definition. It's open to interpretation, which, you know, can put marginalized, especially communities, at risk. There's one quote from a focus group I thought illustrated this well. It has to be sustainable from the growing standpoint, because you have to not only replace your input costs, cover your overhead, so you can provide for yourself and come back and do it again next year. And that points out, you know, that farming is in a way a public benefit, that if the farmer is there again to provide for the community, you know, paying them a fair price so they can be there over time is important. And there was a definition that Allison and Rachel found from the Agricultural Justice Project that defines it well. The fair price is one that covers the farm's full cost of production plus a fair margin for profit and investments, the ability to pay fair wages and other benefits for themselves, their families, and their workers. So we thought that was a great definition and wanted to share that. It's included in the report as a reference for a fair price that others are welcome to use. And the challenge is around, how do you establish a fair price? And even in focus groups a couple of weeks ago, you know, we were talking about it's different based on your geography and the market and the type of farmer that you're talking about. So benchmarking with equity-based adjustments is around looking at the scale of the farm and where they're at to support them in the way that their pricing works for their farm. One way to get to that is doing cost analysis and business planning so that farmers can understand the true costs, because there's a lot out there that don't have the true cost. And doing that will allow them to negotiate and to share with their customers, and developing mechanisms to pay farmers upfront, making payment systems more efficient, and other things that work with farmers' business models. You know, with some of these programs, there's delays in payments, which can really harm all the businesses along and can harm trust, but also just on their balance sheets. So I don't know if Allison, if you want to say anything else about this one. Yeah. All right, and then, yeah, again, welcome to put in the chat, especially on this, how you've established fair prices with farmers in your area. It's a great, I think, learning opportunity for all of us.
So recommendation 5 is about unpacking and shifting power. Really everything, all those values that we talked about earlier, and the vision for a transformed food system. At what's required to move any of that forward is shifting power from those who have controlled the food system back to communities and the people who are most impacted by both food and farming access, land access, farmers on the ground, food chain workers, and the people who are receiving this food, the folks who are experiencing food insecurity. This section, I just want to like read directly from this report because I feel like this paragraph is really powerful. Our modern day food system is rife with power differentials. Food and agriculture is the most concentrated sector of the American economy, with devastating impacts on our physical and mental health and the health of the environment. It's well reported that a handful of mega corporations control every link of the food supply chain, from seeds and farm inputs to processing to what we buy in the grocery store. Only 15 cents of every dollar we spend in the supermarket goes to farmers. Corporate food and agriculture are experiencing record profits, while food insecurity is currently the highest it's ever been in the United States. And those who are food insecure and experiencing diminishing access to land and markets are disproportionately people of color. How are we going to shift that? And I feel like this quote below and this picture to the right really land at it. We talk a lot about who's at the table, who's making the decisions. As we think about how far away we are from those spaces, how are we preparing folks that are going to be sitting at that table in the future to navigate that space? How do we get a pipeline of folks in our community that want to be in the decision-making spaces and prepared and able to apply to that process? These kids on the right in Louisville, Kentucky, from Change Today, Change Tomorrow, that's that pipeline. Taylor Ryan and her team in Kentucky are building up power within communities of color and just doing extraordinary work, as many of you are, to really build new tables and build new leadership that is going to shift these power dynamics in our food system as we move forward. We put together some great recommendations here. You can go to the next slide. How do we go about doing this? Again, narrative change, telling stories and sharing our values and our analyses. I've seen some of them come up in the chat. I love that comment about we're not going to food bank our way out of hunger. And that, developing communications materials, educating volunteers, as Allison had raised, and donors as well, about the inequities and power differentials within the current food system and really what the root causes of food insecurity are. We also really need to promote that vision of a transformed food system. That first slide that I had shown, and I'm sure many of you have vision statements that express something very similar about the mutually inclusive outcomes that we're aiming for through this strategy and through all of our food systems transformation strategies. We also, as organizations and as partnerships and networks, need to reflect our values in how we allocate our resources. So, really being intentional around using our dollars to support historically and socially disadvantaged producers. And also really, continuing to strive towards supporting access to SNAP and EBT at farmers markets. It still continues to be a challenge for a lot of farmers markets across the country, and online food hubs and others that are really working to get folks access to healthy food. So we really need to continue to work in those areas. And also through things like this, through building up communities of practice by participating in coalitions like the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition and others, so that we can align with other organizations and have a collective voice to shift the way in which resources are allocated with our tax dollars and with the kinds of decisions that are being made in rooms at USDA and Congress. I think that takes it back to Andrew for the final one. We're so close.
Right. Yes, last but not least is measuring progress and measuring that through impact over inputs and outputs. And as we were talking earlier, a lot of times in the charitable food system, inputs and outputs are the core measures. And a lot of people brought up that doesn't meet the needs of what they're doing or the vision that they have. And so people pointed to the need for longer term studies to see that impact, especially if you think about growing seasons. Like 1 year is one trial. And so that will take time for the farmers to adjust year over year. So 1 year really doesn't give you the full impact even of program. You need several years. And here's one focus group quote that I wanted to highlight, that we do track the pounds of food purchased, the number of farms supported, and dollars spent on local food. I'm sure a lot of folks do, but it's hard because in an ideal world would be increasing the amount of food we need to distribute, because we don't want people to live in food insecurity or within systems that create food insecurity for them. We'd like the amount of food we distribute to go down every year because we're making larger systemic progress on food equity. So I have mixed feelings about the data we do collect for that reason. And it goes against the grain to want to shrink your program for anybody, but having your output go down being a measure of success is what they're advocating for. And so some of the suggestions for metrics, as far as specific ones that people would like to see, measuring outcomes for the food recipients, including their health in terms of physical health, emotional health, social health. As we mentioned, this is a way to build cohesion just through meeting farmers or getting to know who's producing the food, but also the physical and just the overall well-being of having locally produced nutritious food. Tracking procurement shifts for food assistance providers. So is fresh food displacing or processed foods? And also, how is fresh food distributed amongst a food pantry network? If there's not enough, how are they able to distribute that and shift their procurement? And understanding the long-term impact for farmers and producers as far as business viability. Are people able to bridge to new markets? We've heard a lot of stories about bridging into wholesale markets because this was a kind of a gateway into that, a way to access other markets. Are sales supporting on-farm investments in equipment and infrastructure? Again, if they know there's a consistent market coming up, they can plan for that, invest, and be more efficient in their operations. And then are there jobs created or sustained through this is another question, and that can make the case to all kinds of economic development, workforce development, other areas that can invest in this if they saw the benefit. And then measuring on local economies, how does this benefit the local economy? There's Colorado State has put together this economic impact calculator that's referenced in the report. And there's one focus group participant who had used that. And so they measured their impact using the price from the farmers. And for a community-wide impact, they had spent 1.7 million buying food, and that would be 3 million in economic impact for the community overall. And so if you look at that, then you can make a bigger case to the community versus just how much you spend on farmers. And that's something any farm to food assistance program could look at. And then the generative effect of values-based procurement, impact on the environment, the community. There's so many intangible things that get beyond just the food distributed that take time for the impact to take place and are harder to measure. So putting funding towards this and just intention towards that can build the case, even if it's at unique programs. And then others can say, hey, we know when we do this program in this way, it's going to have this impact because it's happened X number of times in other places.
Great. So we'll stop the slide share for a minute there. And we got about 7 or 8 minutes at least. There's a lot of great things. And maybe if we don't hear some direct, people would like to take 7 or 8 minutes to ask some questions or share some direct feedback or comments on what you've heard from the recommendations of the report. We'll take that time now. And then we can also, maybe Jen can pull some things out of the chat after that that might need some highlighting. So if you have a comment or question, you want to ask it out loud or say it out loud, please do so now regarding these.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that out. This is really exciting. I can't wait to read the final report once it's shared. I'm wondering if any of the 10 teams have members on the call that could give maybe like a 2 to 3 minute synopsis of their experience, or maybe just a highlight of their experience and how that helped inform the report that we just got an overview of.
Susan or Andrew, you want to call anybody out?
I know that Ton was here. You still here?
I think she left.
Yeah. Was that Anna Rose that just said that? I think so.
Mhm.
So I think, it's 2 months ago, we did a whole community of practice on the learning lab and the teams and like the findings and such. we can try to find the recording and drop it in the chat. We had asked them to do so much that we didn't like ask them to be here for this presentation today. But I do want to say that we are going to do a big national webinar to release all of these publications. We're working with Hannah to kind of figure out when the best timing for that might be, given kind of everything that's moving with USDA and the election, et cetera. But within that container, we will have some voices from the Learning Lab sharing their experience as well. Allison was there in terms of an advisor. Anything you would maybe add about some of the learning that happened there?
Yeah, gosh, there was just so much. It's hard to, it's hard to, as you can see by the length of the document, it's hard to sort of narrow it down. I think that in general, the consensus is that this is worth investing in. It's more than worth investing in, that it has the potential to help us reinvigorate local food and farm economies. And there's not enough funding in it, and not enough funding necessarily in the right budget areas to, we haven't reached it yet. We haven't gotten there yet. So there's a lot of advocacy left to do. And just based on the experiences of folks who participated in the Farm to Food Assistance Learning Lab, most of them were not LFPA. They weren't part of the LFPA program. And so it was just super exciting to me personally to see the innovation and the scale at which they were able to operate and to make these things happen on on a wing and a prayer, basically. And also their desire to not repeat that cycle of sticking with a wing and a prayer, but wanting some real funding and real motivation to move forward.
And I want to just say, to your point, Allison and Anna Rose, this is some of the comments that you made in the chat I thought were really cool, is that you said you're tracking denied food offers, or offers we would be able to purchase if our program was funded efficiently. I mean, and how Andrew's talking about how the stories are what stick. It's like, to me, that was just like very powerful to think, here's all the stuff we could have done if we'd had the right funding, if things were the way that we dream them to be, right? And hopefully someday that is the case. But it's these stories that I think are important to keep sharing and talking about, and tracking those impact numbers that can then be turned into stories to help make a difference in the mind of the people who are allocating this money. So
one other thing I might add, if it's okay, Jen, is that the piece on equity and public funding, I think, really came from a lot of the Farm to Food Assistance Lab participants. That idea that it's not about new money. There's lots of money there. As Susan said, $35 billion is being spent by the USDA on food. And imagine if we could redirect some of that funding in this way, that could just create a tremendous groundswell in reinvigorating and rebuilding, or building from scratch local food and farm economies that would have more benefits, would have tremendous benefits for both farmers, but also for beginning to find our way out of food insecurity. So in terms of the narrative, that's I think could be a very important message.
Okay, others have any questions about the report or comments they would like to share regarding the recommendations and how they either, I see some people seeking resources about how to shift some of that narrative. So if you've got a resource and you've been shifting that narrative and utilizing that to talk to your funders and others, drop in the chat or speak now, and let us know, because there's other folks that, we don't want to have to keep recreating the wheel when we've got something effective. We want to learn from each other.
Well, I can just throw in here at the end. We're so excited to share this with y'all. And I'm sorry that we're not able to do it just yet. We like literally just finished the graphic design like yesterday. We got the final version. So we still need to get it on our website and kind of get our act together for doing a big, kind of public push of this report. You will be the first to receive it, the community of practice. Everybody that is registered for this community of practice, you'll get both the recording from today, but also the report. So stay tuned for that. And I just want to give again a shout out to Allison and Rachel, our partners, in pulling all of this together. It was many years of work in the lead up to then partnering with Rachel and Allison and going, what do we do with all this information? How do we pull this into something to really like make sense and a cohesive package and story to share with the world? And they did an extraordinary job of helping us to tie all that together. And also just really want to give a shout out to Andrew for all of his work and supporting the Learning Lab and the survey and all of these pieces that have been pulled together. As I had said earlier, I'm really excited about sharing the Learning Lab profiles. I think that that's a part that I'm like, in addition to the report, it's like they're embedded in there. And they're all so beautiful. And the stories of those, of the work that's happening in those 10 teams is really inspiring. And hopefully you'll be able to take away some great ideas and strategies from those as well.
So now in this last 15 minutes or so, we want to shift to all of you. Few of us have been talking a lot and sharing a lot of great information resources to really hear, as we said, this is kind of the last formal community of practice that's sponsored by the FSLN and the Wallace Center. But we want to know, and I just dropped it into the chat, like really, what are the key aspects of this community practice that's been helpful to you? And what's needed now? Thinking about all the work that's been done, what's next for this community of practitioners, and who might be best positioned to support these next steps and efforts? So take a moment and think, and maybe as you were doing the survey, got some of those ideas going, like, all right, what have I gotten out of this? What could others coming into the field get out of the next thing, and what is needed next, and who can do that? So you can either put it in the chat or raise a hand and answer any or all parts of that, because we really want to hear. We're taking some notes, but this is your turn to share. Many of you have been doing this for 2 years. Many of you, this is your first one, but either way, what's needed now?
As an individual and part of the community, I'm still looking for the understanding of, like we were talking about, the equity and funding, like still trying to learn like where those funds from the Farm Bill go and which ones are like less useful, so we can specifically advocate to our Congress members, because I am not educated on it enough to like say, hey, Congressman, take funding from this line item and put it over here. I'm just still really wanting to learn that, and I haven't found anyone who's like has 3 hours to teach me everything about the Farm Bill. So that's just one thing I've been looking for. And this meeting last month was my first one, and just magical things have happened for me just coming to this meeting. So I appreciate you guys, even though I've only been to 2.
I think that was one of the questions I had was, like, has there been an analysis? I'm sure there has, of like the allocations and the places where there is like, this money can never be moved. It's always going to be for this. This money is flexible, could be moved to things. It just needs a request. Like, and then what is the pipeline for making that request to get the money moved to have it be useful for the thing we need it for? Susan, you're like furrowing your brow. Does anyone know if it's been done, or,
I
that
mean,
kind
Hannah
of
might be able to
specific?
better answer that, honestly, but she's like, I mean, honestly, Andy Fisher in Big Hunger did a pretty good like breakdown of that, at least as it pertains to the emergency food assistance program. But in terms of when we start looking more at like farm subsidies and other titles within the Farm Bill, it gets much more complicated. But I'm really interested. I know that there was a really great report. I'll try and find the link, and we do have it linked in our report. The Center for Good Food Purchasing put together a really great report that analyzed commodity procurements purchases and which companies were getting supported by that, and like how much of that funding could be shifted towards more values-based procurement and the impact that would have, both in like climate impact, but also in other values that are important to us. So let me see if I can find that and drop it in the chat. But I think we still definitely need to go deeper. And to your point, like just building community around that, building a shared understanding, have a conversation as a group about it to really lay it out would be really helpful. I need that too.
Great, thank you. Indy, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you guys. Sorry, I'm not very clothed right now. Otherwise, I would. It's a little bit too hot. As a fireman all morning. And so I recently just gave a presentation to our local city council, and I did it on the topic of regenerative landscaping. And actually, it was really interesting because I made it, I organized the gathering more as a collaborative space inside of the township. I kind of challenged everybody to kind of make a circle and, invited the local, the county, the resource department, the East Bay Regional Park District. So kind of like just brought all the different stakeholders together. And then we kind of had a more collaborative discussion. But what came out of that was there's a lot of money that is coming from fire reduction, from both the IRA and also the county level, almost everywhere right now, especially in high fire risk. So that's a big thing that came up with that is actually being able to grow food and build ecosystem as a way to mitigate fire. And there's a lot of money for that. So it's like a little and also even power too, right? If you set up solar panels and then you put pollinator systems underneath it that are also growing food. There's a lot of wins that can happen if you kind of connect the crises, the poly crisis, with the poly solution. So that's been happening in my community, and it's really amazing to see people getting excited about the solution rather than being freaked out about all the problems. So that's also something to add.
Great. And I think you're echoing, I'm seeing in the chat, just again, more stories of successes and practices that are best practices. I think as those, and we're going to keep developing those, as this community practice began, everybody was kind of new to a lot of this. So now as those best practices are developing, sharing those is a great way. And so I'm going to kind of keep asking, like, what are some of those things that are needed in some areas, and who's best positioned? I know, the FSLN's been doing a lot, and certainly is going to be looking for more funding. I know NSAC is doing a lot in that, but are there other great resources out there that we could be harnessing to share some of this information or carry some of these next steps forward? So I'll open back up people's thoughts on that. Is this space still needed? I think I know the answer, but we need to hear it too from you. If this space isn't needed, there's not going to be
this is Carla from MAFRAC, and I think this space is really needed.
Great.
And I've learned a lot on these sessions. I am really new to all of this Farm Bill and LFPA and everything, but taking bite by bite by bite. And these sessions really help. And I think that report that you all showed early on, I'm looking forward to seeing it because, the more we get together, the better we are instead of trying to do it individually.
Thank you, Carla. Others? Got some amens out there, Carla. Great. Getting some good responses in the chat.
Joshua's got his hand up.
Hey, Josh, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you all. I came in relatively late as well, but this is really inspiring space. It's really incredible to be in the same room with people working on so many different innovative programs. And I feel like I would have loved to be in this from the start, and sincerely hope that there's another round, because I would love to dig into all of the different social funding sources that can be redirected to support local farms and communities in need, and doing it equitably. And having this community of practice would be spectacular as we embark on our own process to do so in Massachusetts. So thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Davida, I see you come online there. Would you like to share something?
Yeah, thanks so much, Miles. Hey, Susan. How are you? My
Good
name
to
is
see you here.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I'm in space, Susan. My name is Davida Davison, and I work for Feeding America. And I do believe on this call are a couple of our partner food banks. I think I saw Heidi on the call from Second Harvest Food Bank in Minnesota. I think Sarah Cross is on the call. Hey, Sarah from Oregon. I think Derek Polk is on the call. My colleague at Feeding Polk is also here. And I'll just like to offer that what has typically happened is there's a cadence that we would host a BIPOC local growers cohort call on a Wednesday, and then y'all would host your call on a Thursday. So we were always back to back. And I would like to offer, and I'm doing this without getting the approval of Heidi and Sarah, but we are still hosting our BIPOC local growers call on Wednesdays, and it is for food banks and for those in the charitable food space who are committed to continue to support BIPOC local growers. And I would say, and I'll invite Sarah and Heidi to comment, that it's possible that we could also be a space for those individuals who want to continue this conversation, who want to continue to build community, who are committed to continuing to push the from charity to solidarity to justice movement forward. And I would love for Sarah and Heidi to comment on us and our willingness to open up our call to others so they can join and we can begin to expand our community as well of people who we engage with. So I would like to offer up our space on, Sarah, is it the second Wednesday of each month for folks to join us on our call if they're able to?
Yeah, we just had this conversation this week, but yeah, we want to make this conversation inclusive, and because we're all working together, so why silo us to work separately when we're richer together? If you are interested in this at all, I'm going to put my email in the chat to get on the emails.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Sarah.
David.
Yeah, I was going to actually do that. Thanks, Sarah.
Great. Well,
So
thank you
all
for
our-
that offer. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Davida.
all are welcome, Miles. I just wanted to
That's
throw
all.
that out for those
Yeah,
individuals.
that's what I was going to ask. Like, are y'all open to outside of the Feeding America network for that conversation? Cool.
And I think, with the values that have been stated here, it sounds, if you buy into the values of this group that come out in that report, it sounds like those are the values that are aligned with what you're all working in, no?
Oh, absolutely, Miles.
So
Absolutely.
if you buy into those values, then it sounds like this is a great space. And maybe that's something else we can talk with Davida and Sarah about posting in a discussion board too, for maybe some folks that weren't here today, but want to continue to be a part of that. So great offer. Couple other comments or people, how they're feeling about what other spaces where this work can continue, or what needs to be advocated for continuing in this space also. I'm seeing a lot of people have just come to this space recently, which is exciting, but I can hear somebody's like, I got FOMO. I've been missing out, wait, don't stop yet. So there is some energy there, but if there's others that would like to comment now, this is a great time for us to hear from you, to know where that energy is. So please go ahead. I'll be quiet for a minute. well, maybe for this time, we'll move into a little closing then. And this is certainly, we're taking notes from the SFLN sides about what's needed and what work we can advocate to continue supporting each other. And one of the beautiful things about a community of practice, it's not a hierarchy, it's a community. And you've all been, I know people have been reaching out to each other across this. I've heard those stories. People are putting their information out there. So continue to reach out to each other. If you've made a connection, continue. When you get that report and you see those highlights, you're like, I want to talk to that person. Talk to that person. Well, if you say, I don't know where to go, come to the discussion board on the FSLN site for the farm to food assistance and ask the question, and ask for people's information. And that's where we can continue this going. It doesn't have to be just once a month. It can be every day. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan and Andrew to kind of bring us to a close. I know and I'll let Jen also, I want to thank you all for the rich information, the openness you've had to each other in building this movement, and inviting Jen and I into the space to help facilitate this. And we continue to look forward to working with you all in all the iterations of this movement. Jen, you want to have a final word before we let Susan and Andrew close it out?
I just want to encourage everyone to, as like what Miles says, it's not a hierarchy, this is a community, and to use the discussion board to stay in touch. Sarah, I would ask you to please get on the discussion board and let people know that they're invited to this, and how they might get more information, because a lot of people left. We lost some folks. So it'd be really great for you if that's, I see you're nodding, thank you. I think people would really appreciate being in your space. And if other things come up, someone's just like, oh, I just need to talk to someone about this, use a discussion board, invite people, say, I'm hosting an open Zoom on next Tuesday at 3:00 p.m. Eastern, whoever can join me, come, let's talk, let's have some coffee together and work out some questions. And obviously too, I know you all know that Hannah is a resource. She's out there. She wants to hear from you. She wants your stories. So don't be shy about getting in touch with Hannah. She's a huge advocate for this work. So thanks again, Hannah, for everything you're doing for everyone. And I just want to say, Susan and Andrew and everyone at the Wallace Center is just an incredible group of people, really, holding space for these conversations. It's been an honor to be a part of this community, and let's not lose touch.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. And thanks everybody for your contributions today. And, we're going to be taking a look at everybody's input from the survey and just figuring out, what direction should we go? While we have the ending of our funding right now from our LFPP and the Rockefeller Foundation that's really supported us in being able to hold this space, I have a sense that we're not done yet. So, your input in that process is really helpful as we kind of discern what our next step should be, and really offer, or really just appreciate the Feeding America folks today, Davida and Sarah and others that are affiliate food banks for offering that space for folks from this community to be able to join in. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going, you guys. Thank you so much for everything that you do day in, day out to keep our communities fed. You're doing extraordinary work. We really are shifting things collectively through each of our different strategies, whether you're a facilitator of a community of practice, or you're pulling together letters to send to Secretary Vilsack, you're taking notes in the community of practice, you're showing up because you're from a food bank or a state agency, or you're a farmer yourself, or you're leading farmers markets, whatever your role is in this, it takes every single one of us to shift the system towards the kind of food system that we all want to be in, that we want to be nourished by, and that we want to leave for our children and grandchildren and 7 generations from now. That is where we're headed, and we're making it happen. So thank you. Keep an eye out for this forthcoming report, and please stay involved in the Food Systems Leadership Network. You always have a place to be in the FSLN. So thanks, y'all, and have a great day.